Listen for words of faith in the Gospel of Matthew. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up onto the mountainside, and after he sat down and the disciples had gathered around him, Jesus began to teach them. Blessed are those who are poor in spirit, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Blessed are those who are mourning. They will be consoled. Blessed are those who are gentle. They will inherit the land. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice, for they will have their fill. Blessed are those who show mercy to others. They will be shown mercy. Blessed are those whose hearts are clean. They will see God. Blessed are those who work for peace. They will be called the children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of their struggle for justice. The kingdom of heaven is theirs. You are fortunate when others insult you and persecute you and utter every kind of slander against you because of me. Be glad and rejoice, for your reward as heaven is great. They persecuted the prophets before you in the same way. For words of wisdom from the mountaintops, we give thanks.
Listen for words of faith from the prophet Micah. Hear what Yahweh says. Rise, plead your case before the mountains, and let the hills hear your voice. Hear, you mountains, the case of Yahweh, and you enduring foundations of the earth. For God has a case against his people, and he will contend with Israel. O my people, remember now, what have I done to you? In what have I wearied you? Answer me. For I brought you out of the land of Egypt and redeemed you from the house of slavery. And I sent before you Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. O my people, remember now what King Balak of Moab devised, what Balaam, son of Beor, answered him, and what happened from Shittim to Gilgal, that you may know the saving acts of Yahweh. With what shall I come before Yahweh and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before God with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will Yahweh be pleased with thousands of rams, with tens of thousands of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? God has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does Yahweh require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God. For words of wisdom from ancient prophets, we give thanks.
Good morning. I'd like to begin by managing expectations. I think Jolyon asked me if I would give the reflection today so I could share some of my experiences as a volunteer in Solomon Islands, not because I have any pearls of theological wisdom to impart. Last year, I spent 6 months volunteering at the National Art Gallery in Honiara through the Australian Volunteers Program, which is funded through the Australian Government's Department of Foreign Affairs. I want to dispel any thoughts you might be having that this was an entirely altruistic act for me to go to this very hot, underdeveloped country. I applied for the volunteer role because I thought my skills and experience might be of some use to the art gallery in Honiara, and they were. But there were many other personal reasons for me taking this role, including, fun fact, I was born in Solomon Islands and I've never been back to the country of my birth. But back to Jolyon and his invitation to do this reflection. Jolyon told me that the gospel reading for this Sunday, according to the Uniting Church lectionary, was the Beatitudes, which were beautifully read to us by Lionel. I remembered them from my Sunday school lessons and told Jolyon that I needed a bit of time to think before I accepted the gig. The Beatitudes that I recall from my early Christian education are actually the ones in Luke's Gospel. In Luke's account, Jesus is speaking on a low, flat stretch of land, not a mountain, and this passage is sometimes referred to as the Sermon on the Plain, as distinct from the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5. But Luke writes in chapter 6, and this is what I was remembering, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who are hungry now, for you will be filled." I didn't tell Jolyon this, but I was grumpy that he thought it would be a good passage for me to reflect on and draw on my experiences in Solomon Islands. And just as a little side note, I have discovered that as I get older, I have an increasing capacity for grumpiness. I think that these verses in Luke contribute to the idea that poor people are happier, the idea that people who are not burdened by material wealth are less stressed, more carefree, and have more time for each other. I don't like the poor but happier concept because I think it's sometimes used as an excuse not to do anything about the inequalities and injustices in our world. However, it is true that Solomon Islands is a poor country. In fact, it is one of the poorest nations in the Pacific. And Solomon Islands is known as the Happy Isles for good reason. While I was living there, I found that it was very easy not to listen to the international news of wars, floods, fires, and Trump, and instead enjoy the beautiful blue-green waters, spend hot afternoons in a hammock, and shop at the local markets where there is an abundance of fresh, organic, locally grown produce that would cost you 10 times as much at a farmer's market in Australia. Solomon Islands people are very helpful and friendly, and they always acknowledge you and say hello. So yes, it is one of the poorest countries in the Pacific, and yes, the people are relatively happy. But I worked with a lot of artists who were very thin. They chewed betel nut, which stains your teeth and lips red, as it has for Hamid, because like nicotine, betel nut reduces your appetite. They ate 2-minute noodles because they are cheap and very quick to prepare. They also ate mountains of plain white short grain rice, which contributes to the high incidence of diabetes in Solomon Islands because it gives you a rapid spike in your blood sugar levels. They didn't earn an hourly wage, but relied on people, mostly tourists or expats working in the country like myself, to buy their artworks. I also met people who couldn't afford to send their children to school. Education is not free in Solomon Islands. This is Frank. Actually, it's not Frank because I'm not allowed to give you his real name under the Australian Volunteers Program's child safety policy. But Frank would come to the art gallery with his mum, who was a traditional weaver. I don't think his mother had many opportunities for education because I had to get her written permission to use his photograph, and she signed her name with an X on the permission form. The female literacy rate in Solomon Islands is only 69%. Frank didn't go to school much because his family couldn't afford the school fees. I had a children's book that I bought in the museum shop, which was written in Pidgin and English, and we read it together. And then I bought him an exercise book, and he started copying out the words so he could learn to write the letters. I think Frank was about 10 years old, and it breaks my heart to see a child who is keen to learn but is denied that opportunity because his family are poor. But on the flip side of this poor but happy concept, I saw one homeless person in my whole time there, and it was the same person. There was a strong sense of community at the art gallery, and artists would help each other, sharing materials, food, and customers. There is no social security system, no aged care facilities, and no childcare centres in Solomon Islands. But people look out for each other and rely on each other. However, I did notice that the caring for sick, aged, and very young family members falls mostly on women and girls. In Solomon Islands culture, the concept of an extended family, or wantok, which literally means one talk, you come from my language group, is very strong. Hospitality and generosity are a given. Connectedness is more important than keeping up with the Joneses next door. If you have a reason to mourn, as we heard in verse 4 of today's Gospel, you can call on your wantok for comfort. Now, based on my experiences in Solomon Islands, I would like to add another beatitude to those recorded in Matthew's Gospel. And I'm hoping I don't get struck down for blasphemy. Blessed are those who have meaningful, reciprocal relationships with other people, for you will be fulfilled. It's the human connections that matter. And I don't think this is too heretical because it is based on a new commandment that we find in John chapter 13, verse 34, that you love one another as I have loved you. All humans are social beings who need connection. But back to the Beatitudes in Matthew, where Jesus is recorded as talking about people who are poor in spirit, who are meek, and who hunger and thirst for righteousness. I don't think poor in spirit means that you are down in the dumps or depressed. Instead, I think it refers to knowing that you have a spiritual need, that you need and desire God's love and mercy, and that you can't earn it. And I don't think that meek means submissive or timid. My study Bible told me that the original Greek version of this verse uses the word praise, which means strength under control, being disciplined and measured. Or to borrow a phrase from one of my favourite ABC Radio National presenters, it means muscular gentleness. Which brings us to the reading from Micah chapter 6. When I looked up the lectionary for today and saw that it included one of my favourite verses in the Bible, I could forgive Jolyon for asking me to speak. In fact, I can thank him for it. Now, many of you probably know this verse, and we sung it together. But isn't it good to hear verse 6 in the context of the preceding verses, where Micah writes, and I'm going to paraphrase here, this is what God is saying: "Why are you behaving like ungrateful wretches? Look at all those things I did for you. I brought you out of slavery. I gave you excellent leaders like Moses and Aaron and Miriam. Do I ask you to pay for your sins by sacrificing a calf that is only 1 year old? Have I asked you for 1,000 rams or your firstborn child, and only then will I forgive you? No. All I ask is that you act justly, be merciful, and walk humbly with your God." I am very glad that I don't have to sacrifice my firstborn to earn favour with God or forgiveness, because I don't have one. Instead, we are called to act with justice, love with kindness, and walk humbly with God. I think it's worth noting that this verse is written in the active voice. It's not in the passive voice or past tense. It applies to all of us now, every day, and it's easier said than done. It helps if you have good role models, and I'm fortunate to have good role models in my parents, Ruth and John Wishart. I was born in a remote part of Solomon Islands because my parents were working there. My dad was a financial controller and later a business manager of the Solomon Islands region of the United Church in Papua New Guinea and Solomon Islands. And my mum volunteered as a nurse and a midwife at the local Helena Goldie Hospital. They lived in a small village in the western part of the country for 2 years and 9 months in the 1970s. At the end of my volunteer assignment last year in Honiara, they came to visit me, and we went back to the village where they worked and the hospital where I was born for the first time. With the help of some local people, including a taxi driver who used his language skills and local connections, we managed to find Ollie Caravo, one of the nurses my mum had worked with 53 years ago. We also managed to track down and visit their housekeeper or house Mary, Hini Mawazaniti. She had also been my nanny. They both live in tiny villages near Munda. I think they felt surprised and honoured to be remembered and that we had sought them out. Back in Honiara, we met up with Reverend Dr. Leslie Bossito, who had been Dad's manager at the United Church. He is 92 years old and being cared for in his daughter's home by female members of his Wontok. These enduring connections, these meaningful reciprocal relationships, this is happiness. This is what it means to be blessed. I'd like to finish with an excerpt from a story that was made by Tavuli News, an online news channel in Solomon Islands.
And we always wanted to take Alison back to where she was born and show her the place. And I think the most outstanding thing was we had to hunt very hard to find her house, Mary. Or I think you might call it something else there. And it took a long time, but we finally found her village with the help of a taxi driver and one tox. And she ran out and put her arms around Alice and said, "My daughter has come back." Very emotional. And I think that's just one of the extra things that volunteers get, that they don't realise that it's a two-way thing. And we were delighted And it's made such a wonderful time for us to come back. And now we can tell others, go and become a volunteer. It's worth it.
After more than 50 years, a lot has changed, but close contacts, relationships and memories will last forever.
It's really great to see some roads and buses in the village. So I see them as really positive.
I was really astounded by how much we were received. I get emotional. It was like going back home. And I think we leave something behind. We leave. And we also, as volunteers, although we give what we have, we get back a lot more from being with local people.
Volunteering feels like giving, but it is also in the receiving.